As David's influence grows, so does the intrigue surrounding his reign. Experience the ebb and flow of power in this captivating chapter of biblical history. Join us for a story of conquest, alliances, and the complexities of royal rule. Recapping our last class, we delve into David's heartfelt desire to build a house for God. However, Nathan initially approves of David's plan, but that very night, God corrects Nathan, stating that David is not to build him a house. Instead, God recounts how he has been with David since his humble beginnings, lifting him up to kingship. God assures David that though he won't build a physical house, God will establish his lineage and kingdom forever through a descendant. This descendant, brothers and sisters, as we know, is none other than Jesus Christ, fulfilling the covenant made with David. David, humbled, sits before the Lord, marveling at God's goodness and grace. The chapter closes with David praising God and expressing his deep gratitude for the promises made regarding his house. So in reflection, we witness David's aspiration, God's redirection, and the establishment of a covenant that transcends generations. David's response exemplifies profound humility and gratitude.
Please turn with me to 1 Chronicles, chapter 18, verses 1 to 4. In the course of time, David defeated the Philistines and subdued them, and he took Gath and its surrounding villages from the control of the Philistines. David also defeated the Moabites, and they became subject to him and brought tribute. Moreover, David fought Hadadezer, king of Zobah, as far as Hamath, when he went to establish his control along the Euphrates River. David captured 1,000 of his chariots, 7,000 charioteers, and 20,000 foot soldiers. He hamstrung all but 100 of the chariot horses. Why did David get rid of all those horses? Because God had told his people that their king was not to multiply horses or wives. Later on, his son Solomon really went into the horse business, but David did not. These were the spoils of war. I think by the time David died, Israel had cornered the gold market. The gold was there in Jerusalem. David, this is verse 7 to 8, took the gold shields carried by the officers of Hadadezer and brought them to Jerusalem. From Teba and Kun, towns that belonged to Hadadezer, David took a great quantity of bronze which Solomon used to make the bronze sea, the pillars and various bronze articles. You see, the materials out of which Solomon constructed the temple were actually accumulated by David. Then we see that the king of Hamath sent gifts of appreciation to David for his victory over a mutual foe. Verse 11. King David dedicated these articles to the Lord as he had done with the silver and gold he had taken from all these nations, Edom and Moab, the Ammonites and the Philistines and Amalek. David is given the victory over all of these old enemies of Israel, which had fought against them when they were weak. You see, in order to become a king over that land, there were enemies to be driven out. The child of God in our day has enemies too. In Ephesians chapter 6 verse 11 we read, "Put on the whole armor of God." Our enemy doesn't happen to be a flesh and blood enemy. Our enemy is a spiritual enemy. That is the point Paul is making in Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. This is the situation in which you and I find ourselves. The idea that the person who follows the Lord can sit down and twiddle his thumbs, that he can compromise with everything that comes along, is entirely wrong. As believers, we need to stand for what is right. We need to take a stand on many issues. We have spiritual enemies that must be overcome. In chapter 19, we have recorded an incident that reveals God has a sense of humor. It also suggests that David was pretty hot-headed. In the course of time, Nahash, king of the Ammonites, died, and his son succeeded him as king. Ammon was an enemy of Israel. David didn't want to make war. David is on the defensive as he was most of his life, as we have seen. God's man will usually find himself on the defensive. As we mentioned in the previous chapter, we are told to put on the whole armor of God. What is it for? To march? No. It says we've got to put it and stand. That is the important thing. The tragedy of the hour is that very few people stand. They get away, they run back, and they get into trouble. Wanting to repay an old kindness, David sent a message of comfort to Hanun upon the death of his father. Verse 2, David thought, I will show kindness to Hanun, son of Nahash, because his father showed kindness to me. So David sent a delegation to express his sympathy to Hanun concerning his father. When David's men came to Hanun in the land of the Ammonites to express sympathy to him, now notice what happened, verse 3. The Ammonite nobles said to Hanun, do you think David is honoring your father by sending men to you to express sympathy? Haven't his men come to you to explore and spy out the country and overthrow it? This is a very serious charge made by these men, apparently young men, who are around the king. They say, David is not your friend. He wasn't a friend of your father's. These men are spies. If you look at verse 4, you will find that they cut off their garments as well as shaved them. They shaved them, which was a disgrace for a Jew. He was told not to even trim his beard. Then, for their complete humiliation, they cut off their uniforms. You can imagine the plight of these ambassadors. They were greatly embarrassed. Of course, it was an insult that could not be ignored, and David, being hot-headed, does something about it. When someone came and told David about the men, this is verse 5, he sent messengers to meet them, for they were greatly humiliated. The king said, stay at Jericho till your beards have grown and then come back. Since these men were too humiliated to return to Jerusalem, David went down to Jericho to meet with them. David told them to stay until their beards have grown out again. Word got back to the people of Ammon what David had said when he heard how his ambassadors had been treated. Verse 6, when the Ammonites realized that they had become a stench in David's nostrils, Hanun and the Ammonites sent 1,000 talents of silver to hire chariots and charioteers from Aram Naharim, Aram Makkah, and Zobah. Instead of David being the one who wanted to make war or initiate war, this new king of the Ammonites wanted to. He wanted to demonstrate that he could overthrow David. I'm sure this was in his mind when he humiliated David's ambassadors. Now he hires an army from Syria to help him overcome David. When David hears of this, he goes into action. Verse 8. On hearing this, David sent Joab out with the entire army of fighting men. The Ammonites came out and drew up in battle formation at the entrance to their city, while the kings who had come were by themselves in the open country. Joab saw that there were battle lines in front of him and behind him. So he selected some of the best troops in Israel and deployed them against the Arameans. The Syrians had the best army, so Joab chose the best of his forces to put them over against the Syrians. The Syrians were coming from the north and Ammon was coming from the south. Mind you, there are enemies behind and before him. Notice he does not give up, neither does he get afraid. He gets proactive, he gets to do something about it. Verses 11 and 12. He put the rest of the men under the command of Abishai, his brother, and they were deployed against the Ammonites. Joab said, If the Arameans are too strong for me, then you are to rescue me. But if the Ammonites are too strong for you, then I will rescue you. His strategy was very good. He told his brother that he would come to his aid if he were to be overcome, but his brother should come to his aid in case he was being defeated. They were going to concentrate their forces at the place of the most heavy attack. This was good strategy. Listen to the way he motivates the people, motivates his army. Be strong and let us fight bravely for our people and the cities of our God. The Lord will do what is good in his sight. Then Joab and the troops with him advanced to fight the Arameans, and they fled before him. Joab is truly an army man, a real soldier. He would have been trained under David, and he and David were probably tops as far as military men were concerned. Notice they don't buckle under the pressure, but they are able to motivate and encourage the entire army. Be strong, fight bravely. The Lord will do what is good in his sight. Verse 15. When the Ammonites saw that the Arameans were fleeing, they too fled before his brother Abishai and went inside the city. So Joab went back to Jerusalem. He came back to Jerusalem to report. Listen to verse 16. After the Arameans saw that they had been routed by Israel, they sent messengers and had Arameans brought from beyond the river, with Shobhak, the commander of Hadadezer's army, leading them. They are sending for reinforcements. When David was told of this is verse 17 to 19, he gathered all Israel and crossed the Jordan. He advanced against them and formed his battle lines opposite them. David formed his lines to meet the Arameans in battle, and they fought against him. But they fled before Israel, and David killed 7,000 of their charioteers and 40,000 of their foot soldiers. He also killed Shobhak, the commander of their army. When the vassals of Hadadezer saw that they had been defeated by Israel, they made peace with David and became subject to him. So the Arameans were not willing to help the Ammonites anymore. David did not want to go into battle. Remember, we are getting God's viewpoint of the situation. And he makes it very clear that David actually wanted to make peace with the Ammonites. He didn't want to fight them. He then sent for Joab on the first campaign, and the enemy fled. But that didn't end the war. The enemy went out to get reinforcements, and with allies on their side, they again regathered against Israel. This time, David himself went out to lead the battle. May I say to you that when David led Israel into battle, he went into battle to win. Some people will read this part of the history of Israel and say that God is cruel. No, dear friend, God is not cruel. He knows the way to save human lives. We live in a sinful world, my friends. It's a brutal world. It's a mean world. We live in a day of permissiveness. We no longer have personal honesty or personal integrity or human sincerity. We need to face the fact that we are in a world of sin. God says that as long as we are in a world like this, a strong man armed will keep his house. Be strong and let us fight bravely for our people and the cities of our God. The Lord will do what is good in his sight.
The books of the Chronicles are believed to be written after exile. One would often wonder, when you have the book of Kings, what is the necessity in having a work like Chronicles? Well, the book of Chronicles was written for a new generation of people who are emerging from the exile. The Hebrew language has undergone a considerable transformation by then, and hence they may have no access to their history. So the books of Chronicles are written to them so that they can understand and reflect on the annals of the kings and their failures. This in turn would challenge them to look at their own life and understand that as they emerged from captivity, the need is a spiritual revolution and revitalization. The message of the chronicler in the victories of David is that God fought for David, and in subduing the nations, establishing the truth that He is the only true God. God of David is their God as well as, and He is expecting them to be devoted to Him, and He will take care of them and restore them. God bless you.